I think the response to capitalism, kind of building on what I said before, it has to have a cultural response. There has to be a cultural response in terms of like we have to find a way to believe about ourselves and about ourselves collectively and individually that we are not just motivated by greed, that we actually have other motivations, and we need to boost those motivations and to say that there are different ways of valuing things besides profit. And I think that that's the cultural work that we have to do, is to to kind of see all the ways that our imaginations have been limited by this relentless pursuit of profit, and how sort of deadening that is to our lives and to our emotional lives, to our creative lives, and to really seek out to really develop those parts that have been suppressed by the sort of implicit but also very explicit violence of the capitalist system. So I think that's one component. So yeah, I mean, but then we also need to challenge it materially, and that means, really questioning who controls what and for what purpose. So instead of saying like, we kind of get stuck in these things like Coke versus Pepsi, like, Amazon versus small business versus whatever. Like, we end up with these dichotomies that actually reinscribe the whole system of running things on a for-profit basis and producing things on a for-profit basis. And what's interesting is that it doesn't have to be that way, and yet it is. It's such a powerful ideology that is constantly reinscribed in the physical world as well. So we have to look at it at an ideological level, but we also have to look at just physically, like when people try to do something differently than allowing corporations to come in and pillage all the natural resources from a small African country and take them to the first world to like make cell phones to sell for outrageously high markups. Is that the way things should run? And if it's not, what happens when we try to do things differently? And so what we see is when a small African nation decides to run things differently, to run things on a more cooperative basis, to say, oh, our natural resources belong to us, and not to these multinational corporations who are pillaging our lands, what happens? And I think that's when the physical part of it comes in. Like physically, it's not, the ideology is driving it, but really it's just like there are people who are doing things, and then they are just like literally killed or literally put in jail or literally exiled because they fear for their lives. And so that's where I think the material aspect of capitalism has to be challenged. And I think the difficulty with that is that, that we've seen is that the most effective way to challenge capital has been the sort of Marxist-Leninist party. That's been the most successful way to challenge capital, in a sustained way. Unfortunately, ends up sort of becoming what it despises. So it's not that successful, but at the same time, that's creating something that has a very tight, centralized sort of command structure is required, or has been required, to challenge capitalism, because capitalism, if there's any hint of a division, capitalism will drive a wedge right in there and game over. And you end up with 50% of the working class fighting the other 50% instead of the majority of the people who do the majority of the work saying, okay, we're actually rearranging this, and we're not letting capital run the show anymore. We're actually just going to run it on some other basis. But the level of intensity of the unity that you need to overcome the capitalist system, even temporarily, is incredible. So when to give a concrete example, when the Bolshevik Revolution happened in what became the Soviet Union in 1917, it wasn't a given what was going to happen. It wasn't a given that it was going to turn into this like giant authoritarian bureaucracy. But what did happen was that within less than a year of the revolution happening, all these different countries invaded the Soviet Union, including Canada, which it's not really taught as part of our history, but there are photos of Canadian troops in Vladivostok and like Eastern, in what was then the Eastern USSR, running around, killing people, conducting war against this revolutionary government, which we didn't really know what it was at that point. And they had very high-minded ideals of redistributing wealth, of giving creative agency to the working class, of abolishing private property, all these kind of amazing ideas. But it never really had the chance to do anything other than become a giant authoritarian bureaucracy, because precisely that was the only way it would survive. And so over a series of a decade or more, they made choice after choice where it was like, do we survive or do we hew to our ideals? And the choice, and you're in that situation, has to be survival. And so, as a result of the sort of assault that capitalism had the communist idea under for so long, we end up with this sort of form of the authoritarian Marxist-Leninist Party as the way to sort of take back control. Obviously, that didn't work out very well. Certainly, you can say that I think you can say it's better in some cases than capitalism. Certainly in Cuba, you can say that despite the fact that there's a suppression of free speech to a large extent, despite the fact that the military has a huge amount of institutional power in the country, people are on the whole much better off than they are in any analogous Latin American country where capitalism was successful and they just pillaged. People live in abject poverty. Death squads roam the landscape. I mean, this is life under capitalism when you've been colonized. And so I don't think we can write it off completely, but at the same time, it's really hard for me to say in Canada today in 2018, all right, the Marxist-Leninist Party, let's do it, like without modification. So I think we need to find, I think that it's a question, like what is the way to maintain the level of unity required to create something that's not capitalism, and to avoid capitalism, the second we get some little concession or little victory, to avoid capitalism just smashing it. I think that's an open question, and it's a real question, and the answers to that question have real consequences one way or the other. You can be idealistic and you can be more likely to be smashed, or you can be, more authoritarian and more likely to lose your ideals. So where on that spectrum are you going to go? Ideally, you have a maximum of unity without having to resort to authoritarianism, and you have a maximum of idealism. And so the question is, culturally, politically, and in terms of our daily practices, in terms of how we interact with each other, in terms of how we make decisions collectively, has to be how do we maintain those the right motivations, and how do we at the same time maintain a level of unity so that we aren't crushed. I don't know the answer, but it's an interesting question, and certainly worth spending a lifetime thinking about, I think.